All right. I want to make sure that I pointed out the importance of that phrase, bread and circuses, that is on the test. You need to know, again, this was a way that the Romans worked to, and the word is appease, making sure that the poor people felt like they were getting something, so they stopped worrying about all the bad things that were happening. So that bread and circuses really means that they were getting some kind of grain, some kind of food that was given to them, and then entertainment with the purposes of trying to make them forget how bad everything is going. So we are 3 sections into this, with our last 2 topics being the rise of Christianity, and then the last part, the fall of Rome. And these things are lining up to create this downfall of this gigantic empire. The first one being, the first big crack in this big empire, or this wall of this empire, the foundation of this empire, is that it can't feed its people. It cannot get enough food to the people, or they cannot provide enough so that people can buy the food for themselves. The second thing that's going to happen will be this idea of this new religion called Christianity. And that, again, will be something that will work towards bringing down the Roman Empire. So, rise of Christianity. Before we begin that, we need to look at what religion looked like in Rome. And again, when we've been talking about religion so far in this class, we haven't really discussed anything other than a set of rules that people needed to abide by in order to appease or make sure that the gods were cared for, so nothing bad happened to us. So Augustus, as the first emperor of Rome, revived those traditional Roman religious festivals and ceremonies to bring back the Roman state religion. And so again, that's important, that everyone in Rome knew that they had to participate in these festival days. It wasn't like, do you want to go? You have to go. The religion focused on the worship of many gods and goddesses. Emperors were often declared gods. So again, elevating them to the status of a god. And most important is that last one. Romans believed their successful empire building meant the gods favored them. So, if you know anything about the religion called Christianity, one of these should be a glaring problem to you. These S's on the ends of these things, right? Because one of the fundamental features of this new thing called Christianity is, how many gods is there? Just one. So if you have a group of people who are believing in only one thing, and you believe that it's important for all of you to be favored by worshiping all these gods, we have a problem. And that begins this big problem with this idea of Christianity. Rome had, for hundreds of years, accepted the religion of whomever religion place they conquered. They conquered someone, they accepted the religion. So what makes this different? And what makes this different is that one God thing, right? They even did okay with the Jews. They just pushed the Jews out, stay out this way, stay away from us, keep to that part. But this is going to be different, and it will require a different response from the Roman Empire. Again, Romans were tolerant of local religions. They never had problems with local religions before. I spoke too soon. And for Rome, many times they adopted some of those new gods. Some of them, they said, oh, we never thought that there would be a god of this before. Let's have them into our empire worship, the more the better. So that's the thought process in this big, giant Roman Empire, that all these religions can be worked in to the good of the Roman Empire. So, Jewish background. And we've looked a little bit at this in chapter 2 when we talked about Jews and Nebuchadnezzar and being pushed into Israel. So, by 6 Common Era, 6 AD, Judah was a Roman province under the protection of a protectorate. So, Judah, that's Israel split. Judah is under the protection of Rome, meaning that those people had to abide by Roman laws. They were protected, so they weren't going to get invaded by anyone else. And then we have within that group in Judah 2 different kinds of Jews. Jews who said, let's just get along. Let's just do what we need to do. Nobody's attacking us. We're getting along okay. And then we have these other sets called zealots. And they say, no, we shouldn't be living under the rule of someone that have such different beliefs than we do. We need to overthrow the Romans. Now that isn't going to happen, right? The Roman army is gigantic. These zealots are few. There's not a lot of them. And so what happens is the Romans need to make a stand against these group of people and say, you can't do this. Here's what happens when you go against the Roman Empire. And so what they did in 66 AD, a Jewish revolt was crushed by the Romans. They destroy everything. They are making an example. Here's what happens when you let people have these ideas of ruling themselves or overthrowing the Roman Empire. We will crush you, crush them. Now, why is that story important? The story is important is because it explains why Jesus was turned over. It's very simple to the Jews. We can't let this happen again. This memory of being crushed by the Romans is a very important part of that story because it is something that the Jews will remember as a result of groups of people trying to overthrow the Roman Empire. And so that is a really important part of the story. But yet, it still continues. So as Jesus approaches his early middle ages, and it's interesting, again, in this story, historically speaking, we don't have writings from Jesus. He didn't write things. He didn't really begin this idea of preaching and healing until he was in his early 30-ish, from what we can figure out and piece together. But he begins to do this, and he is preaching something that is really different. And that, again, in and of itself, always causes conflict. What he's saying is that the rituals that we perform, and those rituals are things very simple as saying common prayers, are not as important as something that happens inside of you. Uses the golden rule to sum up Jewish teachings, commanded to love God and neighbors, and this idea of virtues of humility, charity, and love, again, become the basis of medieval Western civilization. So most all of these things have been here, right? We've had the 10 Commandments. That's not new, but just the change of the way that Jesus begins to preach that in and around Israel, Judah, and the Roman Empire. The teaching are going to lead to controversy, and this is why that first story was so important. There are people that still remember what Rome did to them as a result of people speaking out differently. So in the Jewish community and the Roman community, people feared that Jesus is going to send this revolt again with the Roman Empire. And because of that, the people of Judea are going to turn Jesus over to the Romans. Here he is. don't come kill us again. Don't come destroy our temples again. This one person is worth it for us to keep all of these other things. Jews had their temples, they had their synagogues, Romans let them keep it. These group of people said, take this guy. The protector, Pontius Pilate, orders the crucifixion of Jesus. Followers of Jesus believe he overcame death, causing them to believe that Jesus was the Messiah who came to save Israel. That part of the story is the backstory. And again, nothing changes really at all until we get to his disciples, more importantly, Paul. Christian movement began to spread really slow, and most of this Christian movement spread still among Jews. We don't yet have anything separating Christians and Jews yet. The apostles, those people that followed Jesus, begin to spread this word that guy is the Messiah. And this is what God had promised the faithful Jews. This is what causes the split between Jews and Christians. Christians believe that, yes, God sent the Messiah. Jews believe, nope, that wasn't him. We're still waiting. That's the significant, and that Jews don't believe in hell. That's another really big difference. But this is the beginnings of this two segments that begin with Jesus as a Jew that separate. And the two most important people in this historical discussion of Christianity is Paul. He's the most important. He begins to preach and spreads all throughout Southwest Asia, the Middle East, preaching this word of this man who they believe came to earth as the Son of God, died, rose again, and becomes the Messiah. Almost all of the books in the New Testament are written by Paul in prison, because everywhere he goes, he is going to be imprisoned for speaking and teaching this word of this new faith called Christianity. So all of you that are familiar with that, Ephesians, Galatians, those are all towns. And if you really read them, it is all these apostles writing to the people that live in those towns saying, here's the good word. Here's the good news of this Messiah that has come to save you. So Romans don't care. They just throw him in jail, kind of sort of like the crazy man walking the corners and babbling, and let's just put him in jail for the night, until there begins to be converts to this new thing. 60 days, 2 months, 10,000 converts. It is beginning to become apparent to the Romans, this is something different. This is not the same thing that when we had those little zealots where we had to go throw over and crush a couple of temples. This is different. The New Testament is made up of writings about Jesus' life, letters written to Christian communities. Side note, when you're in college, you have to take a lot of elective courses, and there's a lot that are available to you about anything that you can take. One thing that's always sad that people learn that they have to take is you have to take stinking PE when you're in college. Yeah, PE in college. The only positive thing is that most large universities have fun classes like I looked for something inside where I could eat and have a beverage. So I took bowling and ballroom dancing. That was my PE. So it's not like PE. But you also have lots of other electives where you have to fill in check marks of things. One of the most interesting classes I ever took, and it was not a religious course. I actually think the dude that taught it was an atheist, but it was the writing and makeup of the books of the Bible. It was the most interesting class I have ever taken. Number one, because who put all those books together in the New Testament? Lots of apostles wrote lots of things. Mary Magdalene wrote her life with Jesus. Mary wrote her life with Jesus. Guess where it's not? It is not in the Bible. It is such an interesting course of all of the things that were written over the time and all the different letters. Paul wrote lots and lots of letters, but it's very interesting. If again, one of probably the most interesting classes I've ever taken of just sheer interest. I think most of us took it because we knew there weren't tests. That's the other thing you learn in college is what professors you take and which ones you don't take. Quickly found out the second semester of my freshman year that this class, there was not very much homework and there were no tests. Sign me up for that one. My first semester in college, you also have to take a sociology class. Everybody has to take that. I got the wrong professor. My sweet mate professor, they watched movies, talked about movies. She got an A. And I got the professor that made us do stuff and write papers. So be careful and watch out for that. But it's a really interesting that was a really interesting class. So that's the New Testament. It's made up of the first Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, who tell about their experiences, and then the rest of it is all types of writings from all these apostles. Again, Rome is not paying very little attention to it. The Roman Empire is big. Got these crazy people. We just keep throwing them in jail, But eventually, obviously, we know something changed. Something changed within the Roman Empire, and something is going to change the way that this new religion is viewed. And what happens is at the same time, and this is why Mrs. Norris loves history so much, because at the same time that this Christian thing is happening, Rome is on the downfall. And it doesn't take too much for the Romans looking for a target as to why this is happening. It's these people. These people are committing treason. These people are worshiping false gods. That is why Rome is suffering. That's why. So we go to those Christians and say, look, you guys know that in order for Rome to prosper, you have to worship the Roman gods. We all do. That's the job of living in the Roman Empire, is everyone has to worship the state gods. Christians say, nope, can't do that. Right here, it says this. We cannot do that. The problem and the difference between Jews who believe the same thing and this idea of new Christianity is that now there's so many, and they are not just located in one place. So persecution of Jews began under Nero, and he is going to blame Christians for the fire that's going to burn Rome. Easy target, easy scapegoat, does two things for him. Continues to add bad marks against this group of Christians, and it also alleviates him from any harm of the fire. And so at this point, Christians are going to be found guilty of all different types of things and will be subject to very cruel and very public deaths. That's not unusual for the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire did that as examples. Here's what would happen to you with this. But what begins happening is larger and larger groups will be subject to these cruel and public deaths. So what we have to figure out, and this is where the story changes, all right? So if you are learning this story in a house of worship, you learn why Christianity triumphs very differently. That's your spiritual part of this movement that's attractive to a lot of people. In history, we have to figure it out. Why would people keep doing this? What reason would people keep participating in this thing if it meant sudden death? So I'll also take a pause there. One does not negate the other, right? So what we're getting ready to talk about in here does not take away from, for those of you that believe, what you learn in another place. It's historians have to do and follow through with things differently. So this, again, will be the difference of this story is why. Why did that happen? Two things are going to really make Christianity triumph. And this is part of this story that makes this important. For those of you that do believe that the Christian faith becomes stronger Because it's persecuted. And its persecution requires it to go underground. Its persecution requires it to establish some kind of organization so that it can last. Leaders, it requires, for lack of a better word, some kind of secret handshake so that we can identify who we are. Symbols that become entrenched in that church, like a fish, so that we can see those symbols and we can know this is a person of my faith. Organization, so that we have leaders that can lead us in these places where we begin creating these churches. So, for historians, that makes sense. If you're persecuted, you got to figure out ways to keep doing that thing that you want to do and not get caught. That's a very logical human thing to do, right? You want to do whatever brings you joy, whatever brings you peace, and you don't want to get caught. So you figure out ways to do it, right? That's why there's hoodies, pockets for you to hide your phone, and so you can play with your phone and not get caught. Same kind of thing. We got to figure out how we can keep doing this thing that satisfies us and not get caught. And one of the ways is we begin organizing these churches around bishops. That's one. But we also have to figure out, why would people do this? Why would people put their lives in jeopardy for this thing? And we got a big long list. It's personal. The other following religions didn't require you to interact with these gods, right? Remember, I really was specific about this whole praying thing and why that wasn't, that the temples were just buildings that you drop stuff off at. Offered life, eternal life, and salvation. So this is something new, this idea of salvation, that somehow when you die, something better happens to you. Now, immortality, all these other gods had it as well, but it wasn't for normal people. It was for the pharaohs. It was for the rulers. But now there is something that says I can be a part of that. This one is very important. Basic human need to belong. Why did all of you hate virtual school so much? You're by yourself. We feel as human beings a need to belong to something. Some of us like bigger something. Some of us like bigger tribes. Some of us like littler tribes. But as human beings, we crave a sense of belonging. We crave that. And this, number one, because of its teachings, but number two, because of persecution, required these communities to stay put together. Built communities based on love, not the idea if you don't do this, you'll be stricken and have our whole community destroyed. And that last one is really, really important. Everyone equal in God's eyes. If you are an emperor, if you are the ruling class, if you are in charge of this empire, do you want people to think they are equal to you? Absolutely not. It's another part of this idea of Christianity that becomes threatening to the Roman Empire. We don't want people to think that they're alike. We don't want people to think that they're equal. We don't want people to think that somehow, because of this belief system, they now have access to the stuff that we have. And that, again, becomes another problem for the Roman Empire. Does anybody have questions about this one? Okay. Again, it's a big old giant list. It should be, at this point in our semester, send all kinds of little fuzzy antennas like, ooh, I bet she asked me something like this on the test. Right? Because that is an essential part that makes, again, this study in this class different. Logically thinking, why would people want to be a part of something that could get them killed? And historians have to logically go through those step process as to why that would happen. So, this persecution continued. But at this point, Christianity too strong to destroy. And when we say too strong, we mean organized too strong. It's too strong. Churches are beginning to form. Leaders are forming. And it, again, is too strong to destroy. Constantine becomes the first Christian emperor. Now, here's where we get some weird stuff. He was baptized toward the end of his life. Constantine had a lot of wives, a couple of them which happened to be Christians. And his wife said, we are not going to get to meet again if you do not become baptized. If you're not baptized, we don't get to meet again when we both die. And that will be our first Christian emperor who has a lot of wives. Constantine issues at the end of his life the Edict of Milan, which officially sanctioned the toleration of Christianity. This will add a gigantic crack, a huge crack in the wall of the Roman Empire. And under Theodosius the Great, Romans adopt Christianity as their official religion. Do we have any Roman Catholic? So this is where you get your Roman Catholic Church. This is the beginning of the church. And we have one church, the Catholic Church, from this time period, about 300 Common Era, until we get to the early 1500s and Martin Luther. And this church will come to dominate Europe. So like the next 2 chapters, you're going to feel like, especially you, Gretchen, since you probably went through catechism, you're going to feel like you're in catechism again, learning all this stuff over again. You, on the other hand, have a really big advantage because you know all this stuff. We're really seriously getting ready into sacraments, holy orders, all that stuff. So under Theodosius the Great, Romans adopt Christianity as their official religion. That is a name. We haven't had a lot of names yet on test, but that is definitely a name that you need to know, Theodosius the Great. All right, so questions about any of that? So what you're reading today, before we start moving, hold on and don't move, is writings back and forth between 2 rulers, 2 men in charge of parts of the Roman Empire. And they have a problem. And the title of this assignment is, what are we going to do with these Christians? And that's what they're trying to figure out. One guy's writing like, look, we keep killing them. They keep coming back. What are we going to do? Because this is part of that story that historians have to wrap their head around. Typically, when you kill a lot of people for doing something, people stop doing that something. And so now we're at a point where, how can we stop this thing? Killing isn't working. So I wanted to make sure you understood kind of that background with the killing part, because it's one of the emperors is being slightly sarcastic. And you guys, the most sarcastic people on the face of the earth, don't get sarcasm. So when you're reading that, make sure you're understanding that this is looked at by like, dude, we have killed a lot of these people and they still keep coming back. What else can we do? And that's the question about what to do about the Christians. All right? So any questions about that? All right, that assignment's due tomorrow. Unlike most of our Wednesdays, you are going to need to listen to a lecture, and we will have another short assignment that will start tomorrow that will take us through our last section, the Fall of Rome. We spent a lot of time on the Fall of Rome because it's really important to try to figure out why and how this gigantic empire that was so successful, so powerful, is going to collapse and get run over by a bunch of Visigoths, Vandals, Germanic tribes that eat people, uncivilized beasts. How does that happen? How does that happen? All right, questions, anybody? Okay.